We can map every neuron that fires when you see the color red. We can trace the electrical signal from your retina through your optic nerve to your visual cortex. We can explain exactly which brain regions activate and why. What we cannot explain is why it looks like anything at all. This is not a gap in our data. It's not a question that needs a bigger brain scanner or a faster computer. This is a different kind of problem, the kind that has haunted philosophers for centuries and is now keeping neuroscientists up at night. In the last episode, we saw that the universe appears to be fine-tuned for life with extraordinary precision, but there's something even stranger than a fine-tuned universe. There are minds inside it, minds that experience, that wonder, that ask why. In 1995, a philosopher named David Chalmers stood before a conference in Tucson, Arizona, and drew a line that divided the science of consciousness in two. On one side, what he called the easy problems, explaining how the brain processes information, how we discriminate stimuli, integrate data, report mental states. These are staggeringly complex, but they're engineering problems. We know what a solution would look like. On the other side, one question. Why does any of this feel like something? Why isn't the brain just a biological computer processing inputs and outputs in the dark? Why is there an experience of redness when you see red, an experience of pain when you stub your toe? Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness. And 25 years later, we are no closer to solving it. Here's what makes this so strange. We can correlate brain states with conscious experiences. When certain neurons fire, you see blue. When others fire, you feel pain. But correlation is not explanation. Imagine a scientist who has never seen color. She knows everything about the physics of light, the neuroscience of vision, every physical fact about what happens when someone sees red. Does she know what red looks like? The philosopher Frank Jackson argued no. There is something extra, something that escapes the physical description entirely. Dennett, the great materialist, calls this a philosopher's invention. He argues there is no hard problem. That consciousness will eventually be explained by neuroscience just like everything else. But Chalmers' response is devastating. You can imagine a being physically identical to you in every way, atom for atom, but with no inner experience at all. A philosophical zombie. If that's even conceivable, then consciousness is not something physics alone can explain. In 2001, a Dutch cardiologist named Pim van Lommel published a study in the Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. He followed 344 cardiac arrest patients across 10 hospitals in the Netherlands for 8 years. 62 of them, 18%, reported near-death experiences, tunnels of light, encounters with deceased relatives, a sense of profound peace, out-of-body perceptions of the operating room. This wasn't a survey of self-selected believers. This was a prospective study of consecutive cardiac arrest patients, and here's what made it remarkable. The occurrence of NDEs was not correlated with duration of cardiac arrest, not correlated with duration of unconsciousness, not correlated with medication, not correlated with fear of death. Van Lommel's controls specifically ruled out hypoxia, pharmacological effects, and psychological predisposition. The standard materialist explanations didn't fit the data. Then there's the case of Pam Reynolds. In 1991, at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Arizona, Reynolds underwent a procedure called Operation Standstill. Her blood was drained from her body. Her brain temperature dropped to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Her EEG was flat, no electrical activity, no blood flow to the brain. She was clinically dead for approximately 1 hour. She reported accurate details of the surgical procedure. Details documented by cardiologist Michael Sabom. Now, should we take this as proof of consciousness surviving death? No. The AWARE study, led by Sam Parnia, placed hidden images above operating tables across 15 hospitals to test out-of-body claims. No patient confirmed seeing the images. Memory reconstruction after resuscitation remains a plausible explanation, but the data is strange enough to make honest scientists uncomfortable. And that discomfort is the point. The strangeness doesn't stop at the hospital. It goes deeper, all the way to the foundations of physics. In quantum mechanics, the act of measurement changes what is measured. A particle behaves like a wave when unobserved and like a particle when measured. The double-slit experiment has demonstrated this for over a century. Now, let's be precise. In mainstream physics, observer means any physical measurement interaction, not a conscious mind. Decoherence, the interaction with the environment, explains wave function collapse without invoking consciousness at all. But some of the greatest physicists in history were not so sure. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, Nobel Prize 1918, he said, and I quote, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness." Eugene Wigner, Nobel Prize in Physics 1963, he initially proposed that consciousness itself causes wave function collapse. His thought experiment, Wigner's Friend, explores what happens when an observer observes an observer. And then there's Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize in Physics 2020. He argues that consciousness cannot be explained by classical computation. His orchestrated objective reduction theory proposes that quantum processes in brain microtubules produce consciousness. That mind arises from the quantum level of reality itself. Now the counterarguments are serious. Wigner himself abandoned his consciousness collapse position in the 1970s. There is no experimental evidence for quantum processes in microtubules. The warm, wet environment of the brain causes quantum states to decohere too quickly. Most neuroscientists consider Auchor speculative at best, but consider what Penrose said just last year: AI will not be conscious. The man who won the Nobel Prize for understanding black holes believes consciousness requires something beyond computation. That's not a claim we can simply wave away. There's another experiment that cuts even closer to home. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet measured something unsettling. When you decide to move your hand, your brain shows a readiness potential, a buildup of electrical activity, approximately 500 milliseconds before the action. But your conscious awareness of deciding comes only about 150 to 200 milliseconds before. The gap is 300 to 350 milliseconds. Your brain appears to decide before you do. This has been cited endlessly as proof that free will is an illusion, that you are not in control. But here's what most people don't mention. Libet himself didn't draw that conclusion. He proposed what he called free won't. The conscious mind cannot initiate an action, but it can veto one in the remaining 150 milliseconds. And the methodological critiques are devastating. Scherger and colleagues showed in 2012 that the readiness potential likely arises from random neural noise, not a deliberate decision signal. Studies in 2019 found that readiness potentials are absent for considered, deliberate decisions. The consensus among neuroscientists today is that Libet's experiments do not settle the free will question, not even close. So what do we actually know? We know the brain produces conscious experiences. Damage the brain and consciousness changes. That's undeniable. But we also know something else. The relationship between brain and mind has an explanatory gap that 25 years of neuroscience has not closed. We have NDE data published in the Lancet that defies the standard materialist explanations, even if it doesn't prove anything supernatural. We have Nobel laureates in physics, the people who built our understanding of reality, telling us that consciousness may be fundamental to the universe, not an accident of evolution. We have integrated information theory, the most mathematically rigorous theory of consciousness, developed by Giulio Tononi and Christoph Koch, concluding that consciousness is identical to integrated information, that any system with sufficient integrated information has experience. This implies a form of panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a basic feature of reality. And then there's Thomas Nagel, one of the most respected philosophers alive, an atheist, who wrote in 2012 that the standard materialist account of nature is, quote, almost certainly false, not because of religion, because consciousness, cognition, and value cannot be explained by physics and chemistry alone. The hard problem isn't a gap in our data, it's a gap in kind, and some of the most careful thinkers in human history believe it points to something beyond the material. Let's be honest about what this does and doesn't prove. Does the hard problem of consciousness prove God exists? No, it doesn't. Dennett and the functionalists may be right. The gap may close someday. NDEs may have explanations we haven't found yet. Penrose and Hameroff may be wrong about quantum consciousness. These are real possibilities and we should hold them honestly. But here's what we cannot honestly do. We cannot look at this evidence and say the question is settled. We cannot pretend that consciousness is trivially explained by neurons firing, when the very scientists studying it say otherwise. We cannot dismiss the testimony of Planck, Wigner, Eccles, Penrose, Nagel, and Chalmers as confused or credulous. These are among the most brilliant minds of the past century. They're not arguing for God, necessarily. They're arguing that materialism alone is not enough, that the universe contains something, consciousness, subjective experience, the feeling of what it is like to be you, that does not fit neatly into our current scientific framework. And that should make us curious. Not certain, curious. In our first episode, we saw that the universe appears fine-tuned for life with extraordinary precision. Now we've seen that the life it produced has a feature, consciousness, that our best science cannot fully explain. But there's a third piece of evidence. Conscious minds, wherever they appear on Earth, in every culture, in every era, from the first stone temples to the great cathedrals, have sensed something beyond themselves. A presence, a purpose, a creator. That's not proof. But it's a pattern worth investigating, and that's exactly what we'll do in the next episode. The hard problem of consciousness is not a religious argument.